Hey there! Did you know Kroger always gives you savings and rewards on top of our lower-than-low prices? And when you download the Kroger app, you'll enjoy over $500 in savings every week with digital coupons. And don't forget fuel points to help you save up to $1 per gallon at the pump. Want to save even more? With a Boost membership, you'll get double fuel points and free delivery. So shop and save big at Kroger today. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Savings may vary by state. Restrictions apply. See site for details.
The Two-Footed Podcast is brought to you by EPLindex.com and our presenting sponsor, Liberty Shield. Liberty Shield is a VPN provider. A virtual privacy network allows you to go online, change your location, access things you're geo-blocked from, while keeping your data safe. So, as an example, if you are a UK expat and want access to BBC iPlayer to watch Match of the Day, or ITV Hub, or all four, but you get that message that says this content is not available in your location, a Liberty Shield VPN gets you around that block, allows you to watch whatever you want on those services while also keeping your data safe. And it goes further than that. It allows you to open up Netflix's entire library by just changing your IP address. Liberty Shield is the #1 rated VPN provider on Trustpilot with 5-star ratings across the board. So go to libertyshield.com right now, use the code EPL25 and get either the hardware package or the software package. The hardware package is a router that you plug into your existing router, and any item you want to change the IP address on, be it your phone or your television, you connect that to the new Liberty Shield router. All other items can remain connected to your existing router. There's also a software package, which is instantly downloadable to your device, and you can get using straight away. Again, libertyshield.com, EPL25 for 25% off at checkout. We're also brought to you by Home of Hopcroft, a giftware and homeware company located in Scotland but shipping worldwide. Check out homeofhopcroft.co.uk and do check out the EPL Index and Anfield Index shops, which you'll find on Etsy. Use the codes EPL10 or RED10 for 10% off at checkout. And lastly, do remember to check out A Tad Predictable, hosted by Tadiwa. That podcast is on this feed before every Premier League match week. And then the EPL Roundtable, hosted by Kevin DeVries, on its own EPL Roundtable feed. So just search EPL Roundtable in your podcast device. And that's out after every match week. Now, on with the show. What's good, boys and girls? Two-Footed Podcast. Today is Tuesday. It is the 26th of March, and nobody has told the weather because it's still piss and rain. But we are here, and we are slowly creeping towards the return of real football and the end of this international nonsense. Today, we're going to go through all 20 Premier League teams, and I'm going to pick my favourite player ever for each club. But also, for a couple of them, I'm going to do like top 3, maybe even top 5 for a couple, because there's a few clubs where they've just had so many great, really enjoyable players that one is simply not enough. So, we will go alphabetically. We will go Arsenal to Fulham. We'll take a break. We'll go Liverpool all the way through the Wolves. We'll take another break, and then we'll do news and gossip, and that'll be us for today. So, the Gunners. Number 1 is Dennis Bergkamp for me. Not the best player they've ever had, but the one I enjoyed watching the most is Dennis Bergkamp. I just think when we talk about individual brilliance and creativity and playing off the cuff and a unique style, Dennis Bergkamp falls into that category. like, first and foremost, fundamentally flawless, incredible technique, brilliant first touch. His ball striking was tremendous. Rarely lost possession. Just had this uncanny knack of knowing where everybody else was on the pitch and made everybody else on the pitch better. I saw him first for Ajax, then he went to Inter. It went better at Inter than people give him credit for. There's a notion that he flopped at Inter, which, I mean, they paid a huge amount of money. He didn't deliver a league title, but he was a vital part of winning them a UEFA Cup. And he was played as an out-and-out nine up front by himself, which obviously wasn't ever his role. So Inter, to be fair, wasted him. It had very little to do with him. It was just how they used him. But at Arsenal, he was just a different class. And from the moment he arrived, he was sensational. He just stood out. But I also loved he was a bit nasty as well. Like he wasn't afraid of the physical battle. He wasn't ever afraid to be a little bit nasty and snide and leave a foot in. And I know, like, the second season at Inter, he only scored 4 goals in 26 games. He had some injuries. So when Arsenal paid 7.5 million for him, I think a lot of people were like, oh, wow, that's a huge gamble. But you see him come into the Premier League. And while the numbers don't blow you away after the first 4 years, and even in those 4 years, they don't blow you away, but, 16 and 41, 14 and 34, 22 and 40, 16 and 40, and then it drops off. He has one kind of bounce back in 01-02. He gets 14 in 46, but he becomes so much of a creator, so much more of a number 10, leaving all of the space up against the strikers and behind the strikers for Thierry Henry, that he was contributing more in those later seasons than he had in some of the earlier seasons. He was brilliant with Wright. He was brilliant with Anelka. He was incredible with Henry. And then for the national team, he had multiple partners as well, including Marco van Basten and Patrick Kluivert. And he was just outstanding with all of them. And there's lots of different types of strikers there. And yet he was able to make sure that they were getting the best out of all of them. So he's number one for me. Number two for me is Gilberto Silva, who remains incredibly underrated when people talk about the best defensive midfielders in Premier League history. His name rarely gets brought up. People talk about Vieira, who wasn't a defensive midfielder. He was a box-to-box player. Petit and then Gilberto Silva, they were the defensive midfielders. Vieira didn't have the discipline to sit in midfield and protect the defence. He would go and he would be a roaming destroyer. He would tackle, win the ball, all that kind of stuff. But in terms of just shielding the defence, clever use of the ball, making sure everything ticked over, making sure the gaps were filled, just as understated a player as you'll ever see. He was phenomenal. And that pairing of him and Vieira is one of my favourite central midfield pairings of all time. He was also tremendous for Brazil, won a World Cup with them, won a Copa America with them, part of the Invincibles, had won the Copa Libertadores late in his career with Atletico Mineiro as well, because he kept playing for quite a while after leaving Arsenal. He didn't retire till 2014 at the age of 38. Didn't play a huge part in that Atletico Mineiro success as far as I can remember. I think he did play more in Europe, or in South American competition than in Brazilian league competition. But he was just always so good, so clever. I was talking about Boubacar Kamara yesterday, and he reminds me quite a lot of Silva, as does Moises Caicedo. Now, Caicedo's a bit more dynamic, but in terms of his defensive ability. I think once the discipline comes more into his game as he gets older and more experienced, Gilberto Silva is one for him to model himself off. So he'd be number 2. And for number 3, I'm going to go for the most underrated centre-back in Premier League history, which is Tony Adams. And I don't know how we've gotten ourselves to a position where when people are talking about the best English centre-backs of the last 40 years, his isn't the first name that comes up. Because Tony Adams was absolutely phenomenal. Rarely had a bad game right up until the end of his career. He was just so consistent. He could be a man marker. He could be a sweeper. He could do whatever you wanted him to do. He's very underrated on the ball. Much, much better than some of the players that are hyped to the moon. What Adams did at Arsenal at difficult times for Arsenal was so impressive. 4 league titles, 3 FA Cups, 2 League Cups, a Cup Winners' Cup, Arsenal's Player of the Year 3 different times, Young Player of the Year in 87, only in the PFA team 4 times, which is absolutely baffling, and part of why I don't put any real credence into that, because if it was based on performance level, Tony Adams would have been in it every single year between probably 87 and probably about 98. He was just so consistently good. You just rarely saw him have a bad game. A truly, truly tremendous player. As an honourable mention, I'll throw in David Rocastle here. Now, I'm actually leaving out one of my favourites, but I'm leaving him out so I can talk about him for a different club. But David Rocastle, just as an honourable mention, just a lot of fun to watch when you go back and watch old Arsenal games. And we lost him far, far too young at the age of just 33 to a very, very aggressive type of cancer. And his legacy lives on. And there's a brilliant documentary called Righty and Rocky, which I urge everybody to go and watch. And it tells his story. Ian Wright tells both his own story and his story linked with David Rocastle. Just a phenomenal footballer. Aston Villa, it's Paul McGrath, obviously. It has to be Paul McGrath. Until Van Dijk, Paul McGrath was the best centre-back I'd ever seen play in England. Him and Adams defined the late 80s, early 90s. Hansen had sort of declined a little bit. These two were the ones that sort of carried it on. Adams was the kind of young up-and-comer. McGrath had already well established himself at Manchester United. But at Villa, he was just fantastic. Didn't have the success he deserved. Won an FA Cup with United, 2 League Cups with Villa, but was PFAI Player of the Year in Ireland, was PFA Player of the Year in the first year of the Premier League. Undeniably a phenomenal footballer. Could play in midfield, could play in defence, rarely could train because he had such bad knees, but he was just different class. You never saw him have a bad game. And in 1994, at the age of 34, he would have been 35 later that year, on pretty busted up knees, he went to the World Cup and put Roberto Baggio, who was the best player in the world at that time and was the best player in that competition, put him in his pocket, completely dominated him, and also at the same time made Phil Babb look like a world-class player. If I'm picking an all-time Premier League team, Paul McGrath's in it. If I'm picking any team connected to my time watching football, he's in it. He's just so good. I would find a way to get him in regardless. He was just so good. We'll move on. Some of these now I won't have too much of a back catalogue on, because like the next two, for example, Bournemouth and Brentford, I've only really watched them while they've been in the Premier League. wouldn't have had a whole lot of knowledge of them before they got promoted, other than, knowing that they were football clubs. But if we look at Bournemouth first, I think my favourite player to play for them, I'm going to say Callum Wilson, because I did really enjoy watching Callum Wilson for them. So I don't want to pick someone that's there now, is the thing. Because otherwise, I would actually say Alex Scott. But I'll go Callum Wilson, who, when he was leaving Bournemouth after they got relegated, I just felt like there was a couple of clubs that he would have been a perfect fit for. Now, he went to Newcastle and he's done brilliantly, and it's been a perfect fit. But I was thinking more, Brighton were looking for exactly that type of forward player. He's been very unfortunate with injuries over his career, but just a really good all-round number 9. A really, really good all-round number 9. So I'll go with him for them. Brentford is a little bit trickier, because obviously they've only been in the division for a couple of years. But prior to coming up, they had some good players along the way. And I'm going to go for them with Ezri Konsa, who I've always been a fan of. I wanted Liverpool to sign from Charlton, because they bought Gomez, and Konsa came through around the same time, a little bit later than Gomez. But I always liked Konsa equally with Gomez, and I think he's gone on to prove he's a very, very good Premier League centre-back. But yeah, I'll go with Ezri Konsa from Brentford. Brighton. There's a few ways we could go here. Now, to be honest, my favourite player that I've actually enjoyed watching for Brighton, there's two of them, and it's the two boys that were in midfield last year. It's Caicedo and Alexis. Now, I go back further than that with Brighton, obviously, because back in the day, I lived in the area and I went to the games on the regular. But I'm not really inclined to pick some of those players because, most of them weren't very good. With the greatest of respect, most of them weren't very good. I think I'm inclined to just go with McAllister and Caicedo as the two, because I did really, really enjoy watching both of them play for Brighton. And for me, having seen them at a really low point, to then see them develop into what they've become is just brilliant. And like Lewis Dunk was there when I used to go. He was only a young player at the time. He was just breaking through. Trying to think who else was there. Jake Forster-Caskey was there, and I quite liked him as a player, mostly because I was a fan of his dad, Darren Caskey. He was at Brighton. He came through Brighton's academy, was there for a bunch of years. But I think I'm going to go with the two boys that were there last year. Actually, you know who was there when I used to go? Up front, they had a collection of big lads in the team for a time. They had in on loan from West Brom, a young Chris Wood. They had Glenn Murray, who's a bit of a legend in the area. Even though he went to play for Crystal Palace afterwards, when he went back, they still adored him. He might be the only player that straddled that Brighton-Palace divide. And they also had Ashley Barnes. He'd come in on loan from Plymouth and played for Brighton for 3 or 4 years before going to Burnley. I think most people remember him from Burnley. But yeah, they had all three of them at one time, and it was quite interesting and quite reflective, shall we say, of a lot of the football that was being played in that time at Brighton. So yeah, but we're going to go with McAllister and Caicedo, two more recent vintages. Burnley. My favourite player that's played for Burnley is Chris Waddle. It was Chris Waddle, wasn't it? Yeah. Now, most people don't remember he played for Burnley. It was back in 97, 98. And he was well past his best. He was 37 at that point. I'll go with Chris Waddle. I always enjoyed watching Chris Waddle play, and I'm not going to get him in. I didn't see him play for Toon. I don't think I've ever actually seen a game of him playing for Newcastle, a full game. Maybe one or two, but I wouldn't have been watching for them. Did have seen games of him at Spurs, and he was a tremendous player. But at Marseille and at Sheffield Wednesday, and I loved him at Sheffield Wednesday because he was already into his early 30s, but he was just so graceful and so powerful down that wing, like a big, powerful, quick winger with incredible talent. But obviously can't get him in for Sheffield Wednesday because they're not in the Premier League anymore. So I'm going to put him in for Burnley because I think genuinely of all the players that have played for Burnley, he might be my favourite one. Chelsea, these are going to need a couple. So we'll do three here. So my favourite ever Chelsea player is Michael Ballack, who I fell in love with watching for Bayer Leverkusen and really, really wanted Liverpool to sign him. And they had an opportunity and Gerard Houllier passed on it because Gerard Houllier. He ends up going to Bayern, becomes obviously a star with Bayern, moves to Chelsea, ends up back at Leverkusen, 98 caps for Germany, 42 goals for Germany. What I just loved about him was he was big, he was upright. He didn't have great pace, but he was a powerful runner, and he was impossible to get the ball off. He would take the ball off whoever he wanted to, just using his physical presence. He could pass and shoot with both feet, almost to equal degrees. Like, he'd pick the ball up on the edge of the box and wind up for a shot. And it was actually pointless trying to close him down and force him onto his other foot because he just turned back and unleash an absolute rocket with the other foot, regardless of whether it was left or right. And that last season at Leverkusen, we scored 17 goals in the league, 23 in all competitions. It's just, I'd imagine 12 to 15 of them are worldies. Scored worldie after worldie for Bayern. Still great when he came to Chelsea, even though he had turned 30 and was on the downward side of his career. But he had 4 great years at Chelsea. And when you look at the success he had, won a league title with Kaiserslautern as a young player, was a squad player, I think, for that league title. Moves on to Leverkusen, came pretty close to winning a treble, ended up missing out on everything. Won 3 Bundesligas and 3 cups with Bayern, won the Premier League and 3 FA Cups with Chelsea. But one of the more unfortunate players of all time, like Champions League runner-up twice, World Cup runner-up in 2002, European Championship runner-up in 2008, deserved more in terms of medals, but still won a load, won 5 league titles in his career and a bunch of domestic cups, but always just fell short of the biggest ones. And oftentimes he'd been suspended for the final and didn't get to play, having done so much to carry a team to said final. Like, he was outrageously good in the 2002 World Cup. And then he got suspended in the final for a tactical foul to help his team. And I've always hated the idea of missing a final because of 2 yellow cards. If it's a red card, fair enough. But the 2 yellow card thing always bugged me. No matter what the final is, be it FA Cup, Champions League, World Cup, whatever. He was just so good. Yeah, 0102, Leverkusen were on track for a treble, lost a 5-point lead over the last 3 games of the season to finish second behind Matthias Sammer's Borussia Dortmund when Sammer was manager, lost the Champions League final 2-1 to Real Madrid, a game in which they were arguably the better team, and then lost the German Cup final to Schalke 4-2, a Schalke team that they were significantly better than. And then he follows that up by getting to the World Cup, getting to the final and missing it through suspension. I mean, that year, like that couple of months would have crushed a lesser player. But not him. He just got better and better. What an immense player. That Leverkusen team, by the way, was a lot of fun. A lot of fun. There's some really good players in that team. But that Real Madrid team is the Galacticos. So, you know. Number 2 on my list is another Michael. It is Michael Essien, who I think is, again, like others have mentioned, ferociously underrated. Like, he was as good a midfield player as there was in the Premier League for 4 or 5 years. Injuries, he had 3 brilliant years when he arrived over, and then he had a couple of years of injuries, and then he got an injury-free season and was immense again. If it hadn't been for the bad knees, I think he would be recognised as one of the best midfielders of all time, because he could do everything. He had power, pace, incredible ball winner, great ball striker, good passer, super high IQ. He'd been brilliant at Lyon beforehand, him and Diarra in midfield for them. Diarra ended up going to Real Madrid, and he had some injury problems there, and unfortunately neither of them probably fully reached their top potential. But Michael Essien was just an unbelievable footballer. And I would watch him play all day long. And third on my list will be Gianfranco Zola. So Zola was the first really great player that Chelsea had. Like, in his prime, really great player that Chelsea had. In my time watching football, not rewatching old games, just watching as things went along. He lands at Chelsea in 96 to much excitement. Even from non-Chelsea fans, everybody was excited about getting Gianfranco Zola to the Premier League because Gazzetta Football Italia had been a phenom, and he was part of that brilliant Parma team that were just so much fun to watch. He was 30 when he arrived over, and everyone thought, okay, well, if he plays 3 or 4 good years, guy played 7 years with Chelsea and then went home and played a couple more years with Cagliari. Very, very unfortunate to have been in the national team at the same time as Baggio, and then obviously Totti and Del Piero come along. So he never got the national team run that he deserved, but just a phenomenal football player. Like, sometimes players are just really, really fun to watch, and Zola was just one of those. Small, incredible balance, immense dribbler. Like, in the tightest of spaces, he could drift either side of a defender. Didn't have a whole lot of pace. Could kind of speed up for a couple of yards, and then he'd have to slow back down because he just didn't have that burst away pace, but he didn't need it because he was so intelligent. So intelligent, and one of the best set piece takers of all time. So he's 3 for me. He might be the one I enjoyed watching the most, to be fair. But in terms of favourites, Ballack and Essien because of other things as well. Next up, Crystal Palace, Ian Wright. Ian Wright is the one I'm going to go with. That's why I left him off the Arsenal list. But Ian Wright, If you watched football in the late 80s and early 90s and didn't adore Ian Wright, then you were doing it all wrong and you were far too caught up in tribalistic nonsense. Because Ian Wright was just phenomenal. Quick, skillful, brave, so inventive in how he finished. The closest thing the English game has had to Romario is Ian Wright. And when you look at what he did at Crystal Palace and then at Arsenal, just a phenomenal footballer. I wish he'd retired when he left Arsenal. He had one good year at West Ham, but I kind of wish he'd retired. He came up to Celtic and actually got to see him play in the flesh at Celtic. And he'd lost kind of the burst and stuff, but he was, I mean, what age was he by then? He was 36, 37. But you could tell he was still super high IQ and he had an immense first touch. Like, absolutely insane how good he was at his close control. Everton. I mean, my favourite player that's played for them is Gaza. I love Gaza as a footballer. It's horrible to see where he is in life and where he's been in life for a long, long time now. But I loved watching Gaza play. I loved watching Gaza play so much that I used to watch Rangers on a regular basis, and people know my thoughts on that football club. But he was just incredible. And he was a cultural phenom as well. Like, he was a genuine football superstar. Brilliant for Newcastle, brilliant for Spurs. Obviously went to Lazio off the back of the bad knee injury, was never the same player after the knee injury, but also the shenanigans he got up to in Italy obviously didn't go well with Italian culture, and certainly not what that club was expecting of him, having paid a fortune for him. But went to Rangers and was immense for them, was good for Middlesbrough, was well past it when he got to Everton, but still had flashes of brilliance. He also played for Burnley, to be fair, but I'm happy to go Chris Waddle so I can have Gaza here, because then otherwise I'd have to praise another Everton player. So we'll just go Gaza, and then we'll go Fulham. Luis Saha would be the one from Fulham. I just love pacey strikers that finish really, really well. And that's what he was. Super quick, simplified game, didn't try and do things he couldn't do, would run the channels, would run off the shoulder, a brilliant finisher. United was the wrong move for him. He wasn't good enough to play for United. That was always my feeling. He was always a level below the caliber of Manchester United, because they were looking to win league titles and he just wasn't that caliber. Now, he did have a couple of good seasons there, but I always felt with him, a team more in the upper echelon of the mid-table, you know, what we would now classify as a team that's competing for the Europa League. A West Ham, for example, perfect for him. But United was a bridge too far. He did pretty well at Everton when he went there, and was then a disaster for Sunderland. But yeah, Luis Saha is who I go with for Fulham. So we'll go to break, we'll come back, and we'll rattle through the next 10. So I'll see you in a sec. Right, welcome back. So, Liverpool. My favourite Liverpool player of all time is Luis Suarez. I know he was only at the club for 3.5 years, but he remains the best player I've ever seen wear that jersey. Absolutely phenomenal footballer. And I know, again, there's other stuff that he did that, you know, we shouldn't big him up for, but as a footballer, just sensational. Ridiculous. I don't think we've seen a better player in the Premier League. And you can say, well, Cristiano played in the Premier League. Cristiano in the Premier League was not as good as Luis Suarez in the Premier League. Cristiano wasn't as good as Henry in the Premier League. He wasn't as good as Salah in the Premier League. Rooney was better in the Premier League than Cristiano Ronaldo. Cristiano had one great season in the Premier League, but to me, he doesn't make the all-time Premier League 11. I mean, my front three is going to be Salah. I go Shearer because of longevity, to be fair, and Henry as a front three, but Suarez was better than Shearer as a footballer. And his single season in 13-14 is still the best season anyone has ever had in the Premier League. He was phenomenal at Ajax, incredible for Barcelona, great for Atletico Madrid. And wherever he goes, he just wins. Like, he wins the Uruguayan Premier Division in 05-06 with Nacional. Obviously went to Groningen, didn't win anything there. Went to Ajax, won an Eredivisie. Went to Liverpool, won a League Cup. Almost dragged a bad team to a title. Went to Barca, won 4 league titles, won a Champions League. Went to Atleti, won another league title. Went back to Nacional, won another league title. Back to Nacional, won another league title. Went to Gremio and won trophies there. And he's now obviously with Inter Miami and scoring for fun. Like, he's got 6 in 8 games. He got 29 in 54 for Gremio. The guy can barely run anymore because of the pain in his knee, but he's just so, so good. It's actually ridiculous how good he is. I would watch him play 100 times out of 100. I love watching Luis Suarez play. Absolutely phenomenal. Number 2 is John Barnes. John Barnes is another player who, because kids don't know, people forget. Like, John Barnes, one of the best left wingers of all time, and yet rarely gets brought up in those conversations. PFA Player of the Year in 87-88, Football Writers Player of the Year in 87-88 and 89-90. Part of a brilliant Liverpool team in the late 80s that conquered all in England with 2 league titles. It should have been 4. Won 2 FA Cups. It should have been 3. Won a League Cup later on. Just incredible footballer. Absolutely phenomenal. Had been brilliant for Watford, obviously, before that as well. But at Liverpool, like, he was probably a top 3 player in the world in the late 80s. Maradona would have been 1. Hull probably would have been 2. And Barnes was probably 3. Barnes or Laudrup. It would have been, and Van Basten, to be fair. That would have been your top 5. Regardless, that would have been your top 5. Maradona was 1, and the other 4 you can argue about, but it's those 4 as your top 5. And he just one of those players that you sit and you watch compilations of now, and you're like, if he was doing this now, he'd be the best player on the planet. But he played in an era where we had so many incredible footballers, and people try and make out the modern game is better. In terms of top-end talent, it's just nowhere close, and hasn't been for a long time. We probably have more talent overall now, less bad players, but in terms of truly top-end talent, the 80s and 90s wiped the floor with the modern game. 3, Javier Mascherano. Again, I'm going favourite, not best. Mascherano, I just adored. And what Mascherano did to me was he made me immune to players leaving, so now I don't care all that much. I will shed a tear if Van Dijk leaves, but Mascherano, I adored him. Every stop of his career. River Plate, Corinthians, never understood what West Ham were thinking. Was delighted when we got hold of him. Went to Barcelona, was brilliant there. Kept following him when he went to China, and he went back to play in Argentina. Phenomenal career for his national team. Just one of the best ball winners I've ever seen. Like, for me, I'd take him over N'Golo Kante, and it wouldn't be even something I need to think about. he was a better version of N'Golo Kante. Because he could match Kante's ball winning and ball carrying with superior positional sense. He could be your sitter. He didn't need to go and do the ball winning. He could just sit, because he also moved to centre back and was fantastic there, winning a European Cup. Man marking, he might be the best man marker I've ever seen. Like, Pep used to stick him on random players all over the shop, and he would just take them out of the game completely. Rafa did it once or twice as well at Liverpool, when he would play with Momo Sissoko in the early days when he got there, and he might man mark someone and you just wouldn't hear from them for the whole game. And I loved how psychotic he was as well. 4, I'm going to go Van Dijk, obvious reason. Actually, I said I wasn't going to do players who are still at clubs. So I'll leave Van Dijk. I'll leave Salah. Gerrard's an obvious one. There's no real point in going too deep on Gerrard. Everybody knows all about Gerrard. So we'll put Gerrard at 4. And at 5, Daniel Agger. An absolute Rolls Royce for centre-back. And he played in the charity game at the weekend. He looks like he could still play at 39. Injuries ruined what would have been, I think, a truly great career. He had a good career. He would have had a genuinely great career if not for injuries. He was the most talented centre-back, I think, in Europe around the 2010 kind of time, when Vidic was probably the best in the world. Like, Agger was much more talented, but he was always injured. When he could stay fit, he was phenomenal. But yeah, I'll go Agger 5. Luton Town. We'll have to go back in time a bit on this one. Let's have a look. Luton Town players. That's notable players. Paul Walsh. Yeah, I'll go Paul Walsh. Former Liverpool player as well. Liverpool bought him from Luton. Played for Spurs, played for Portsmouth, played for City, played for Portsmouth again. I always liked Paul Walsh. Just a bustly, busy second striker who would get his fair share of goals. Very skillful player, but was more than happy to put ego and everything to one side for the good of the team. So I'll go with Paul Walsh. Yeah, we'll go Paul Walsh. Right, City. Georgie Kinkladze will be one. Just one of those random players that popped up in the Premier League in the 90s that nobody'd heard of and was just sensational. Now, didn't really grasp the concept of team footballer, but was a brilliant individual. So much fun to watch. So he's one. I'm going to go Keith Curle, number 2, because I always liked Keith Curle as a centre-back. I think he was very underrated. 3 will go David Silva. I mean, that's an obvious one, isn't it? What a player. 4 will go Aguero. Again, what a player. And we'll leave it at 4 for City. Yeah, we'll leave it at 4 for City. Because I want to get Keith Curle, and I know he's not a great player when he stretched, but I always liked Keith Curle as a defender. And Silva and Aguero and Kinkladze have to be in, but I'm getting Keith Curle in. Manchester United, number 1 is Roy Keane. I mean, there's just no debate. The best central/defensive midfielder that the Premier League has seen, the best captain, the best leader that the Premier League has seen, never has had a bad game. 7, 8 out of 10 every single week. 9s and 10s thrown in regularly. Dominated games in a multitude of ways. People don't remember young Roy Keane pre-ACL for the box-to-box threat he was. but he could do everything. He was a good passer of the ball. He was an incredible ball winner, super intelligent, great positional sense. And like just the leadership and the desire and the drive to win, like he put United on his back so many times. So he's got to be number one. Number two, Andre Kanchelskis. Just loved him. Nothing fancy about his game, just rapid and such a threat. Just knocked the ball by his man, got in behind, and drove low cross after low cross across the face of goal. We don't have enough wingers that do that anymore. One who actually reminds me a bit of him is Pedro Neto when he plays on the left. That ability to go outside or inside, that straight line speed, and the variety of crosses. It's not all about a chipped cross or a lofted cross. You can drive across sometimes when you don't have great options, and you can just look to make something happen, gain a bit of luck. But what I always love about Kanchelskis as well is he would get into certain positions. Like if he picked the ball up and he was sort of, as you look at a goal, if he was within the lines of the 18-yard box, like the vertical lines, the lines coming out from the end line of the 18-yard box, if he was within them, he wasn't passing. He was shooting every single time. He was going to square up the defender, lull him into a false sense of security, knock it by him, 2 quick steps, and he was going to rattle it across into the far post. Just a brilliant player. Andre Kanchelskis, number 2. Number 3 is Dennis Irwin. I've talked at length about Dennis Irwin. There's no need to go into it anymore. Number 4, United will have 5 because there's been a lot of great United players over the years, and Paul Scholes is number 4 for me. Hugely, hugely underrated by the modern generation of morons that watch compilations and look at SofaScore for player ratings and decide to judge players based on that. Paul Scholes, when I hear people talk about Gerrard and Lampard and Scholes, I don't understand the debate. I really don't. Because Gerrard and Lampard played totally different positions to Paul Scholes. Like when they were all playing, Paul Scholes was playing deep in midfield next to Roy Keane. Gerrard and Lampard were 10s. They couldn't have done what Paul Scholes did. Gerrard had the passing ability, but he didn't have the game intelligence. He didn't have the ability to run a game. He didn't have the discipline to run a game the way Scholes did. Now, Gerrard was a more talented footballer and could do more with the ball. And I would say it was a better footballer than Paul Scholes, but he couldn't have done what Scholes did. Couldn't have. Not then. Even when he moved back there later in his career, he had no discipline. And Liverpool were just easily walked through when Gerrard was playing in central midfield. Lampard, for me, shouldn't even be in that debate. He isn't close to either of those two. But he was the best goal scorer of the 3 because he had the least defensive work to do. Because Chelsea played 3 behind him and just let him go. But Scholes is 4. And number 5, I'm going to go Lee Sharp, who I don't know why, I just always liked as a player. You could tell he was a Jack the Lad who didn't always take things as seriously as he probably should have. I think that's probably why he fell out with Ferguson, that he was more interested in the lifestyle around football than, actually being a footballer. But he was really, really talented. And there was a time when United, I can't remember what season it was, United moved him to left back and put Irwin right back. It was before Neville had really established himself. So it was probably either 94, 95 or 95, 96. And he put Sharp at left back and Irwin at right back. And Giggs was right wing. Giggs was left wing. I think Beckham had come in at right wing by then. And it was the next year for Beckham. Might have been the next year for Beckham. Might have still been Kanchelskis. What year did Kanchelskis leave? Andre Kanchelskis. I think he left in 95. He did. It probably would have been the 95-96 season. 95-96 Manchester United. Let's have a gander at this and see. Is this the season Yeah, Paul Parker had gotten injured quite a bit that season. Neville was coming along, but was still very inconsistent. Now, Neville played the majority of games at right back, and Irwin played at left back. But there was a run of games. I remember they played Sheffield United at Bramall Lane in the midst of this run on a Monday night, and I remember watching that game with my Uncle Colin, and he had Irwin and Sharp as his fullbacks, and it was Beckham and Giggs as the wingers, and they were brilliant, absolutely brilliant. They would have still had Bruce. Pallister was in and out that year because he was always injured. Cantona would have been up front with Cole. Was it No, it wouldn't have been Cole, would it? It would have been Cole, yeah. Cantona and Cole. And the midfield two would have been Keane. But I don't think it was Scholes. I think it was Keane and Butt. Because Scholes was still more of a second striker at that point. So it would have been Keane and Butt with Cantona and Cole up front. And they just looked unstoppable. Try and find this game. No, it couldn't have been that season. Was it the season before? Maybe it wasn't Sheffield United. Maybe it was Sheffield Wednesday then. I was convinced it was Sheffield United that they played. Was it Sheffield United in the FA Cup in 94, 95? Maybe it was. I can't really remember. It's a long time ago. But I remember watching them play. And I was definitely watching them on a Monday night. I was definitely watching my Uncle Colin. I could have sworn it was Sheffield United at Bramall Lane. But either way, it doesn't matter. Lee Sharp is in at number 5. Newcastle. David Ginola is clear number 1. Absolutely clear number 1. So much fun to watch. Left foot, right foot. Could go outside and whip crosses. Could come inside, could cross or shoot. Just embarrassed fullbacks. When he first came over to Newcastle, him and Ferdinand, I think, arrived in the same summer, and it was just an instant connection. And they were brilliant together. Number 2, I'll go Peter Beardsley, who I loved when he was at Liverpool. He was good for Everton, but at Newcastle, he was so much fun. Playing off Ferdinand. Very, very Zola-esque in a lot of ways, in that kind of second striker type of role. Little impish player, great dribbler, uber creative, inventive, just found ways to embarrass players. So I'll go Peter Beardsley. And number 3 here, I'm going to go with Johan Cabaye. I just always liked when he was at Newcastle. I especially liked when Joe Kinnear called him Johan Kebab. But we'll put him in as number 3, mostly for the kebab comment. Nottingham Forest then. So Des Walker is number 1. Des Walker was a brilliant centre-back, lightning quick, super underrated, more known maybe to a lot of people for his time at Sheffield Wednesday after he'd come back from a year at Sampdoria, but he was brilliant for Forest in the 80s, and then he finished off at Forest. One of the quickest defenders I've ever seen. Undersized, only 5'10", 5'11", not the biggest physically, like as in not hugely built, but never got bullied. Great player. Number 2, I'll go Brian... No, number 2, I'm going to go Stan Collymore. I'll go Stan. I loved Stan as a player. Now, some of his behaviour and stuff I could have done without, but there was mitigating circumstances which have since been explained, and I think he's actually developed into quite a good human being over the last few years as he's kind of gotten kind of his life together a bit more and dealt more with his mental health issues. And I hope he's in a better place now, because he certainly seems to be. When you see him talk, or you listen to what he has to say. So I'll go with Collymore number 2, and then Brian Roy number 3, because I just loved watching Brian Roy play. When he came over to Forest from Foggia after the 94 World Cup and the partnership with Collymore, they were one of the best in the Premier League. So I'll go with him. Sheffield United. I'm just going to go one. I'm going to go with Michael Tongue, who was a midfield player for the Blades from 2001 to 2008. Just a very talented player. Like a poor man's Ballack in some ways. Really enjoyed watching him play. Didn't have the career he should have had. Injuries. Probably stayed at Sheffield United too long. But always enjoyed watching Michael Tongue play. For Spurs, number 1 is going to be Jurgen Klinsmann, who is one of my favourite strikers of all time. Just everything about him. Watching Klinsmann was a show because the way he moved was so different to everybody else's running motion. That kind of high stepping motion of his, dynamite in the air for a guy who was only 5'11", had just amazing power and spring and could just generate bullets from his forehead. Great finisher, good volleyer of the ball. Technically, he lacked in some areas, but yeah, Jurgen Klinsmann to me, I loved watching him play. Number 2 for Spurs, Victor Wanyama. I don't care what people say. Wanyama was great for a couple of years. He was brilliant for Southampton. When he went to Spurs, he was absolutely phenomenal. He'd been great for Celtic. He went to the Nou Camp for Celtic and completely crushed the Barcelona midfield by himself. Iniesta, Xavi, and Busquets put them all in his pocket and just dominated them physically. Brilliant for Southampton and really, really good for Spurs until the injuries just took their toll. So I'm going to go him. And then, as a third one, I mean, I got to go Luka Modric, really. I've got to go Luka Modric. One of the great playmakers we've ever seen. A genuinely fun player to watch. So we'll go him. West Ham United. There's a few I enjoyed over the years, but Paolo Di Canio is the standout. So I'll go Di Canio 1. I'll go Trevor Sinclair 2. I think I'll leave it with just 2 for them. And then Wolves, 2 players I could have mentioned for another club. Now, Ruben Neves is the real answer here, by the way. So let's just put him in as 1. But I just want to mention these 2 players because I really enjoyed watching them play. And I didn't mention them for the club that they came through the academy of. But they both played for Wolves. They moved to Wolves around the same time. One is Steve Froggatt, really underrated player, played left wing, could also play fullback. Just a proper old school outside left, a bit like Stuart Downing in a lot of ways, but quicker and a better delivery. Not as consistent a delivery as Downing, though, and injuries spoiled his career. And another one whose career was spoiled by injuries. But for me, when I was a kid, this was my favourite player to watch in English football. Actually, before I finish on him, or before I name him, my second one at Villa, because Villa do deserve more than one. I just named one, and they deserve more because they're a huge club. Dalian Atkinson, let me put him in for Villa, because Dalian Atkinson was brilliant. And let me put Stilian Petrov in as number 3. Tremendous football player. My last one then for Wolves, my favourite player, non-Liverpool, when I was a kid, Tony Daly. Just loved him. Absolutely rapid. Like proper explosive pace. Could beat anybody 1v1. Sensational. Scored some unbelievable goals over his career. Career was blighted by hamstring injuries because he was such a quick twitch player and he just couldn't stay fit. But what a player when he was on it. absolutely unbelievable. And I didn't know this. Since retiring, he has completed a Bachelor of Science degree in Sports and Exercise Science at Coventry University. He worked for Forest Green Rovers as their fitness coach and then worked with youth players at the Villa Academy. When he finished his studies, he joined Sheffield United as a fitness and conditioning coach, but later quit the role after a row with Brian Robson 4 years later. Then he went to Wolves and he worked there as the fitness and conditioning coach. Stayed at Wolves for 10 years and has since joined Lions Den Gym as a personal trainer. I have no idea. But Tony Daly was, for those that are old enough to remember, Tony Daly was just really, really fun to watch. So there we go. That's it. I will be back after this. Right, welcome back. So there's international nonsense tonight. The only reason it's notable that England are playing is that Kobbie Mainoo is set to start alongside Ivan Toney. I've seen some people come out and try and knock Mainoo and say that, you know, he's overrated because he's a United player. I don't think he's overrated at all. I think he's really, really good. I don't think he should be playing for England because he's got 23 senior appearances for United under his belt. And I don't think he's earned an England call-up yet. But I assume the reason they called him up and are playing him as quickly as they are is because he had the option of playing for Ghana and they wanted to avoid losing a big-time talent to Ghana. But I don't think he's overrated. I genuinely think he's an outstanding young player. I'm happy for Ivan Toney as well. Nottingham Forest have lodged an appeal against their 4-point deduction for breaching the Premier League's profit and sustainability rules. They breached the threshold of 61 million by 34.5 million. Their argument stands mostly over their decision to hold on to Brennan Johnson and sell him late in the window. They argue that they were completely compliant with the investigation and that's what makes them different from Everton. One of the reasons Everton were so harshly punished originally with the 10 points is because their cheating was more flagrant and also they didn't comply with the investigation or cooperate as much with the investigation. Forest could potentially have this points deduction raised. It could be put up to 6 points. I think they should have just taken the 4 and moved on, but they've made the decision to appeal. Andros Townsend criticises uncertainty over Everton and Nottingham Forest points deductions and says that it makes a mockery of the top flight. Now, obviously, he is speaking from a Luton perspective because for Luton, if Forest still had their 10-point deduction, if Everton still had their 10-point deduction, they would be below Luton and Luton would be out of the relegation spots. And Forest are obviously below them with their 4 points. But if it gets reduced, they could go above them. And I think obviously for Luton, actually, I'm wrong. Sorry. Yeah, they would be below them. They'd be a point below Luton, as are Forest. I think Luton would like some certainty so that they know what they need to do for the remainder of the season. A former president of the Chinese Football Association has been sentenced to life in prison for bribery, according to the country's state media. Chen Zhuan was pled guilty to taking bribes worth a total of £9 million. Mental. Life in prison seems a little bit harsh, though. Like, if we're being honest, it seems a little bit harsh. That league was mental for years, with money being shoved under tables and across tables and envelopes. It's just very, very strange. But life in prison it is for him. Now, I assume he'll appeal. Someone else who needs to appeal something is Gabriel Barbosa, who has been suspended for 2 years for attempted anti-doping fraud. Gabigol made it difficult to carry out an anti-doping test the day before a game. He claims he's never tried to obstruct or defraud any test, and I trust that it will be cleared in the higher court. Since the beginning of my career as a footballer, I've always followed the rules of the game and never used any banned substances. I've been subjected to dozens of tests, all of which have been negative. That's going to be an interesting one to follow. Obviously, Gabigol, probably one of the more disappointing players of the last 20 years. Such a super talented player. And he's been brilliant in his homeland. Like, he's phenomenal in Brazil. But when he's come to Europe, it has not been good. Flopped badly at Inter Milan, flopped on loan at Benfica. But for Santos in both spells and for Flamengo both on loan and since making the move permanent, he has been great. Last season wasn't his best year, but he was still very good. He still scored 20 goals in 58 games. But like, he plays a phenomenal amount of football. Like, you look at the games played, it's ridiculous. In his last 6 seasons, 53, 59, 43, 45, 63, and 58. And even back when he was a kid at Santos, 2 seasons of 56 games. And was on course for the same the next year, but left to go to Inter Milan. Be interested to see how that one plays out. Reading. Dai Young commits to letter of intent with a potential buyer. The sooner Dai Young lets Reading go to somebody who is capable of running a football club, the better for all involved. It's horrible to see what's happened to that club. And hopefully, under new ownership, they can get back on track. Manchester United are targeting Brentford manager Thomas Frank to take over from Erik ten Hag, not Gareth Southgate. That is an exclusive from Steve Kay, so it's horseshit. According to reports, Sir Jim Radcliffe is planning for Ten Hag to be in charge next season, which I've said all along I think is the case. United will prioritise a deal for Michael Olise. I don't believe that. Tottenham are interested in completing their permanent signing of Timo Werner, but are in no rush to trigger his option to buy. Arsenal have matched the offer of 51 million plus bonuses that Chelsea made for Ousmane Diomande. His buyout clause is like 80 million. There's just no way that deal is going to happen. Arsenal don't have the type of money either, so this is horseshit. Aston Villa midfielder Nicolo Zaniolo wants to return to Italy. Yeah, I mean, it's the best place for him, to be fair. Norway striker Erling Haaland is viewing Man City's quarterfinal in the Champions League against Real Madrid as an opportunity to prove his credentials for a future move to the Spanish Giants. That's always been clear that that's where he's going to end up. West Ham expect Said Benrahma to seal a permanent move to Lyon this summer. He's obviously there on loan. Aston Villa and Everton are interested in Fermin Lopez. I just can't see that Barcelona will let him go. He's only 20 and he's really good. Bayer Leverkusen are among the top European clubs interested in signing Everton's England under-17 goalkeeper Douglas Lujancic. I could have that wrong. 16-year-old. I'd be surprised if Everton were too keen to let him go, but maybe he's out of contract. Roberto De Zerbi is flattered by interest from Bayern Munich, but he's in no rush to make a decision over his future. Chelsea face penalties, including points deduction or expulsion from the Premier League if they are found guilty of breaching spending rules under Roman Abramovich. There's no if. They are guilty of breaching spending rules. Everybody knew they were cheating for years, and now it looks like they're going to get caught. But, I mean, the new owners will just argue that it didn't happen under their watch, and it'll probably just end up with some sort of points deduction, some sort of big fine. But they also need a points deduction for their current spending breaches, so we'll see what happens. Liverpool will rival Manchester United for Federico Chiesa. I doubt it. Fenway Sports Group and Michael Edwards are exploring a deal to purchase Toulouse. Now, I would have doubts over that, to be completely honest with you. Because if I'm not mistaken, Redbird Capital. Now, Liverpool have an existing relationship with Redbird Capital, so maybe Redbird will be willing to sell Toulouse to Liverpool. The current president there is Damien Comoli. They have a relationship with him as well. But I have doubts that that's who they'll get. United, Sofiane Amrabat, we know all that. Barcelona will seek to extend João Cancelo's loan for the year. We know that. Barcelona are interested in signing Alex Garcia. No. Raheem Sterling has played a key role in setting up a trial at Chelsea for promising 18-year-old Nigerian striker Hafiz Umar Ibrahim. Okay. Everton are interested in signing Arsenal's highly rated 18-year-old Welsh forward Omari Benjamin. He's meant to be really good. So again, it would be a surprise if Arsenal were willing to let him go. But again, he might be looking at the future and saying, well, where am I going to get games? But didn't Everton just spend big money on a young striker last summer? LAFC have reportedly sent Olivier Giroud a formal contract proposal to join them as a free agent. And I think he will. So there we go. I will see you all tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Sports Social Podcast Network.